Hi again, welcome back. It's Wednesday. It is January 13th, and I'm going to start our next read aloud for the next couple of days. Again, we've been working on fix up strategies and monitoring our own reading, and I have a book that is a little difficult to understand unless you have some of the background. If you know some of the background information ahead of time. So we are going to do a lot of some monitoring strategies for today and tomorrow. This book is called Follow the Drinking Gourd. And there's actually a song that I'm going to try to find and post on Canvas for today after you've kind of read and listened to this read aloud today. You can maybe listen to the song and it might help it make a little bit more sense. This is actually based on, again, kind of a real facts, real happenings back in the 1800s when it had to do with the Underground Railroad. And at the beginning of this book, there's kind of a author's note. It's kind of long there. And basically what it's saying is that in the early days of slavery in the United States, many slaves tried to escape and they tried to flee to Canada. If you didn't know where that was, that would be a place to stop and kind of maybe look up where Canada was. It's a country to our north. By the 1840s, a loosely organized group of free blacks, slaves, and white sympathizers formed a secret network of people and places that hid escaped slaves on their dangerous journey to freedom, a network that came to be known as the Underground Railroad. So the Underground Railroad was not really a railroad. It was basically a secret way to get slaves to be able to get to freedom. And they traveled at night. They stayed in hidden places and people's homes who were kind of part of this group, and they hid them. And it was very secretive and very private. And so they called it like a railroad because they were traveling, but it really wasn't a train. So we've got to know a little bit about the background before we can kind of read on. You've heard of Harriet Tubman. She was probably the most famous conductor. Again, not really a train conductor, but she was the leader of organizing this Underground Railroad. And another person who maybe you haven't really known his name a whole lot is a sailor, runaway slave named Peg Leg Joe. And so he was another one. He made friends with slaves and taught them this song, Follow the Drinking Gourd. And there was actually a hidden meaning in that song, which we'll discuss as we read through it. So remember that as we read it, and we'll discuss and we'll figure out what the drinking gourd really was. So as these slaves traveled along, they, through Harriet Tubman's help and Pegleg Joe's help, they were able to get to Canada, and they guided them to freedom and other safe places that were in the north. So that's kind of a background, and I'll read it. And again, we'll have to stop and kind of monitor what we're talking about, okay? Long ago, before the Civil War, there was an old sailor called Pegleg Joe who did what he could to help free the slaves. And as I'm looking at the picture here, I can see he was called Pegleg Joe. He's obviously lost his leg, probably in some kind of accident. I believe he was a sailor, so it was probably in some kind of accident that he was in, and he now walks with a cane and has a peg leg. Joe had a plan. He'd use hammer and nail and saw and work for the master, the man who owned slaves on the cotton plantation. Joe had a plan. At night, when work was done, he'd teach the slaves a song that secretly told the way to freedom. Just follow the drinking gourd, it said. So I'm thinking, he was hired by the plantation owner, the master, but yet he's kind of on the side of the slaves and trying to help them. So he was kind of working secretively to help free them. When the song was learned and sung all day, Peg-Leg Joe would slip away to work for another master and teach the song again. So he kind of had a hidden job, I guess, hidden agenda, things to do. One day, a slave called Molly saw her man, James, sold to another master. James would be taken away, their family torn apart. Just one more night together. A quail called in the trees that night. Molly and James remembered Joe's song. They sang it low. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd. For the old man is awaiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. They looked to the sky and saw the stars. And if you look very closely, you can kind of see how they've outlined the stars. If you know what that's called, that's a specific constellation of stars. Do you know? It's called the Big Dipper. That has something to do with the drinking gourd. Taking their little son, Isaiah, old Hattie, and her grandson, George, Molly, and James set out for freedom that very night, following the stars of the drinking gourd. They ran all night through the fields till they crossed the stream to the woods. It's kind of hard to see that picture. It's very dark, but there they go, escaping through the night. When daylight came, they hid in the trees, watching, listening for the master's hounds set loose to find them. But the dogs lost the runaway scent at the stream, and Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and young George were not found. They hid all day in the woods. So I'm thinking as I read this, why do you think they hid during the day and they traveled at night? Any thoughts about that? If you think it's because it was safer to travel at night because they weren't as likely to be seen or noticed, you're right. That's exactly why they traveled at night and hid and probably slept during the day. At night, they walked again, singing Joe's song and looking for the signs that marked the trail. The riverbank makes a very good road. The dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on. Follow the drinking gourd. And there it is. Walking by night, sleeping by day. For weeks they traveled on. Sometimes berries to pick and corn to snatch. Sometimes fish to catch. Sometimes empty bellies to sleep on. Sometimes no stars to guide the way. So they had to kind of find their own food. If it was not a clear night, they couldn't see the stars. How would they do that? They never knew what lay ahead. There was danger from men who would send them back, and danger from hungry beasts, but sometimes a kind deed was done. One day, as they hid in a thicket, a boy from a farm found them. In a bag of feed for the hogs in the wood, he brought bacon and cornbread to share. Singing low, they traveled on. The river ends between two hills. Follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side. Follow the drinking gourd. And we're going to stop right there for today. We'll finish our book tomorrow. But as I think about that, follow the drinking gourd, and we saw that constellation of stars in the sky. It's if you look, it kind of looks like what you might call a ladle, where you would maybe scoop up water and drink it. They called that a drinking gourd. And so when Pegleg Joe said to follow the drinking gourd, what he really meant to the slaves was to follow the Big Dipper in the sky, and that would be the direction they needed to travel to escape to freedom. So that's a little bit more as we kind of think and monitor our own reading. We'll finish the story tomorrow and see how it ends. Have a great rest of your day.